So glad that you're here this morning. Hopefully when you came in, hopefully you were handed one of our bulletins. If you could locate that, maybe that's on your seat or fell through, or maybe your neighbor stole it while you were singing, but maybe you can grab one of those real quick. If you take a look, on the far side is a communication card. If you could rip that off. It has a little place on here for your name, your address, any other pertinent information that you think we might need here at Frontline. We don't inundate you with phone calls, don't send you a whole bunch of emails. It's just an opportunity in case that we need to get a hold of you or you need to get a hold of us, at least we have a point of reference. So in a moment, the offering baskets are going to come by, and just drop that in there. That would be great. Got a lot of things going on here at Frontline, so if I can direct your attentions to the video screens, Eric and Rick are going to tell us some more.
Hey everyone, welcome to Frontline. My name is Eric, and I have the honor of being interpreted by Cree for this week's announcements. For those of you who may not know, in our 11 a.m. service, we have ASL interpretation as a way to honor and minister to the deaf and hard of hearing community. So for announcements this week, we really want to show you how we embrace this part of the Frontline ministry. Announcement number 1, Discover Frontline. If you're new to our church, you'll really want to check out this great event. It's an informal and easy way to get to know a little more about this amazing church. It's Sunday, April 10th at 12:30 p.m. That means if you're here on Saturday night, it's tomorrow. And if you're watching this on Sunday, it's today, right after the second service. We have free lunch and free childcare. And if you're interested in Discover Frontline, be sure to head out to the orange wall in our lobby to sign up. The second thing we want to remind you of is our women's event coming up. The theme is Loving Who You Are. This will be a great chance for women to come, hang out, connect, worship, and get pampered. Lori Cisco, our children's pastor, will be the keynote speaker. So mark your calendars, ladies. The date of this free event is April 29th at 6 p.m. And signing up is simple. Just head to frontlinegr.com to reserve your spot. The last thing we want to announce is our Giving Ourselves Away offering that we will be doing over the course of the next few weeks. This offering will be something extra outside of our normal tithing that will go directly to camp scholarships for our kids and teenagers, and also our local and global missions that we partnered with as a church. We really hope you'll consider giving over and above in the coming weeks to support some great ministries. Hey, thanks for listening and watching. And now you know what's happening here at Frontline.
Awesome. We are so thankful that we are able to offer ASL at the second service here. And if you, awesome. So, hey, if you know of anybody that is deaf or in the hard of hearing, we would love to have you invite them to our church here, to our second service, so they too can take part here at Frontline. Love to right now. We're going to transition into a time of giving, so if I could ask the ushers to come forward, that'd be great. Just a reminder, we have 3 ways to give here at Frontline. You can give right now during the worship service as the baskets come down the aisle. Otherwise, you can give online at frontlinegr.com. And the third way is to text any amount to that number right there. If you're new with us today, if you're new, I'm so glad that you're here. We are really thankful that you're here. Feel no pressure to give right now. In fact, instead of you giving us a gift, we have a gift for you. So after the service, if you make your way out to that orange wall over there, we have a little bag that tells you a little bit more about Frontline, about what's going on here. And after the second service, right after this service, right over here in the cafe, we have what's called Discover Frontline. We have a few open spots, so we'd love to have you join us if you're new. Find out a little bit more about our past of the church, but really more importantly, where we're going as a future of the church. So love to have you join us there. So let me pray for the offering, and then Brian, our senior pastor, is going to come up here and continue our series of Joint Generations. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, we pause right now, and we acknowledge that you are the King of Kings, you are the Lord of Lords, and you, O Lord, are to be praised. Lord, as we take this time right now to give back to you just a portion of what you have so blessed us with. Lord, we would ask that you would find us obedient in this, that you would find us faithful in this, that you would find us as cheerful givers that would honor you with what you have so blessed us with. We ask, Lord, for wisdom and discernment as far as how to spend these monies, how to further the mission here at Frontline of reaching and connecting and sending. We ask, Lord, that you would give us discernment, wisdom on how to best use these funds. So, Lord, that you could be magnified, that you could be lifted up, and that you could be exalted. For that, Lord, is why we are here. We ask that you would be praised, that you would be honored in this time of giving. And we ask it in your name. And all God's people said, Amen. Amen.
Hi everyone, how are you? Good. It's good to see all of you here with us. It's been a cold, bitter week here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. For those of you who are just returning back from spring break destinations that could be called warm and sunny and south, I want you to know I've prayed for you this past week. As I look at your Facebook posts, on the beach and everything, I have prayed for you by name that God would give you such a sunburn. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. It's good to have you back with us, and I know a lot of people are still traveling back from spring break. We are in part 2 of a 3-part series called Join Generations. And it's based actually off of a book that Matthew wrote about our church being intergenerational. We're an intergenerational church. That's a big part of our vision. And so there's 3 parts to the book. And so last week we looked at looking backwards. And then today I'm going to talk about what does it mean to look upwards. What does it mean for the generations in the church to look upwards toward God together and be led by God together. And then next week, Matthew and I are going to work together to close out the service. And we're going to be talking about looking forward, where we're going as a church when it comes to intergenerational ministry and what it means for the generations to work together in the Bible, or in the church, I mean. So if I could just get us started this morning, there's this idea throughout the Bible, you see over and over again that God uses very, very young people. You can find story after story. In 2 Kings chapter 22, they actually made an 8-year-old kid, the king of Israel. And apparently it went pretty well because he reigned for 31 years. It's not bad for a 3rd grader, right? There's another story, you're probably familiar with the story of David and Goliath. And many scholars believe that David, as a young man, when he fought Goliath, that he was probably somewhere between 12 and 16 years old. So again, not bad for a middle schooler to be used by God for something like that. Then if you go into the New Testament, Jesus has 12 disciples, and most people believe that Peter was the oldest of the 12. And Peter was probably somewhere around 17 years old when Jesus first called him and when he began to follow Jesus. So like a junior in high school, being used by God to start this revolution called the church, that today is 2 billion people living today call Jesus Lord. And that's an amazing thing. That God would use people that young all throughout the scriptures. But God also uses very, very old people all throughout the Bible as well to accomplish his purposes. Moses, maybe the greatest leader in the Old Testament, he was 120 years old when he finally stopped leading Israel. Led Israel to 120. Also, John, who wrote the Gospel of John, many people believe that when he wrote the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, he was probably somewhere in his 90s when he wrote the book of Revelation. So God uses, all throughout the Bible, different generations of people. Well, you're never too old, never too young, for God to use you all throughout the Bible. And so we kind of believe here at Frontline, we believe that all the generations are supposed to be represented and being used by God in the church. That it's not supposed to be just one generation that kind of acts and leads and then all the other generations kind of sit back and watch that generation. That's not a true picture of what God has planned for the church. And so how does God see the generations? How does he see the church? There's a medical condition, to illustrate this, there's a medical condition that you are all suffering from. whether you realize it or not. It's called presbycusis. Has anybody ever heard of presbycusis? There's been like a couple people at every service that have heard of it. So presbycusis is this medical condition that we all have, where basically, starting at about 18 years old, what happens is you start to lose the ability to hear the higher frequencies in the sound spectrum. About 18 years old, it really begins, and you start to begin to lose more and more of those higher frequencies in your hearing. And everybody experiences it. So a few years ago, there was in England these department stores that were having a problem. There were all these loitering teenagers, apparently, at the department stores, and they were there, they were loud, and they were causing problems. And so a British scientist came up with this thing called teen buzz. This is true, you can actually go Google this and find it. So what they did is they put loudspeakers in the department stores, and they would play this high-pitched frequency. It was 20 kHz is what it was, and it was called teen buzz, and it was just this tone, this very, very high-pitched tone that they would play through these loudspeakers. And when they would play it, these teenagers would freak out, right? Because it was just this piercing, awful tone. And so they would eventually leave because they couldn't take it anymore. And the best part was, the adults who were there to shop couldn't even hear it because of presbycusis, right? So it solved the problem. Now, a few years ago, that actually got switched around. And there was something that was developed. It was a cell phone ringtone called the mosquito ringtone. Has anybody ever heard of this? The mosquito ringtone? Okay, a few of you have. So the mosquito ringtone is that frequency, that 20 kHz, that high-pitched teen buzz frequency they used in England. And they made it so you could download it and use it as a ringtone for your phone. So what was happening is students were downloading this, and they could get calls during class, right? And their teacher would have no idea that they were getting a phone call. Because of presbycusis. They had lost that higher range of their hearing. They couldn't hear it any longer. So this is a real thing. So just to illustrate this, so you know I'm not crazy, I wanted to have a little bit of fun with this if we could this morning. So this is going to require a little bit of crowd participation. But we downloaded several different high-pitched frequencies just for fun, so you can actually see this is not a made-up thing. This really happens to us as we age. And so what's going to happen is in a moment we're going to play a tone. It's 8 kHz, and supposedly that's a high-pitched frequency. Go ahead to that first slide there. Supposedly that's a frequency that everybody can hear. And so when it appears, or when this sound goes, it's going to be a high-pitched tone. If you can hear it, stand up. And I realize there's some of us here today who aren't going to be able to hear the tone, and that's okay. Just bear with us for just a moment. But when you hear the tone, if you can hear it, stand up. Go ahead. Okay, stay standing. Everybody stay standing. Keep going with this. Okay, that's almost everybody in the room. Most of us can hear that tone. Okay, so here's where we're going to have a little fun. We're going to raise it. This is 10 kHz. 60 years old and younger should be able to hear, theoretically, this sound. So we're going to play it. If you can hear this sound, stay standing. If you cannot hear this tone, I want you to sit down. Okay, so go ahead and play the tone. Okay. Okay, a few people sat down. Most of us are still standing in the room. Okay, go up. So this is 50 and younger should be able to hear this tone. If you can hear this tone, stay standing. If not, sit down. Go ahead. Every service there's been that same response, like, dang it, I'm so let down with myself. Okay, all right, this is getting interesting. All right, this is a frequency that's supposedly about 40 years old and younger should be able to hear. Sit down if you cannot hear it. Okay, more of a sat down. All right. Okay, this is 30 years old and younger. You should be able to hear this. So, yeah, have a seat if you can't hear that. They played it. Do it one more time, will you? Do that one more time. Okay, if you can hear that, it's great. That's the last one I can hear, by the way. Go ahead to this next one. This is about 24 years old and younger should be able to hear this one. I can't hear it. So if you can't hear it, sit down. Go ahead. Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. And what we've discovered is this is the mosquito ringtone. This is the high frequency that 18 years old and younger should be able to hear. And we found out our speakers may not be able to project this sound. You should be able to hear it a little bit, but it's harder to hear because our speakers don't quite go up this high a lot of times. So 18 and younger, if you can hear it, stay standing. If you cannot, sit down. Go ahead. Okay, just a few of us left standing. As you can see, you guys can go ahead and sit down. My son Drew can hear it, but my older son Alan and I can't hear it. So you get the idea. You look around the room, who is still standing. As we get older, it's the younger people who are still standing by the end. As we get older, this happens. We lose a little bit of those higher frequencies in our hearing. So here's kind of the question for this morning. Here's the main idea, the main question I want us to talk about. So we know physical presbycusis happens, right? Where we lose the higher part of our hearing. Is it possible that spiritual presbycusis happens to us as well? Is it possible that as we get older, as we age, not because we have hard hearts or anything, but just because of familiarity and because of routine, is it possible that we lose the ability as we get older to hear some of how God speaks, especially as it relates to the younger generation? Again, not because we're, cold or we've walked away from God or anything, but does spiritual presbycusis happen as we get older? Do we, as we age, lose the ability to hear a little bit of what God is trying to say? I want to look at a story today, and it's Matthew started the first part of the story last week, if you were here, and we've been looking at this story in 1 Samuel. And basically, what Matthew covered last week is there's a woman named Hannah, and she's barren. She can't have a child, and she wants more than anything to have a child. And so Eli is a priest who works in the temple, and he hears God's voice, and he prays for her, and he believes that God is going to grant her a child. And so she and her husband do conceive, and Hannah has a son, and she names him Samuel. And she feels so compelled by God that God gave her son, and she was supposed to dedicate him to the Lord. So she gives her son, Samuel, to Eli the priest for him to raise in the temple, because he was dedicated to the Lord. He was supposed to grow up in the temple. So that's the story Matthew looked at last week. So Eli is the older priest, and Samuel is the young boy growing up under his care. Let's take a look. This is chapter 3, verse 1. It says, "The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. Now in those days the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. So one night Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place." Now remember that, that's important. He's lying down in his usual place. "The Lamb of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord, where the ark of God was." Now the writer is very specific to tell you where they lay down to go to sleep, and there's a reason for that. When it says that Eli, the priest, he lies down in his usual place, in the original language it literally means like a non-specific place, just a random spot in the temple. So Eli had a routine. He had a usual place. He was familiar with it. It's just kind of what he did. And so he laid down to go to sleep in his usual place. And the Bible doesn't even mention where that was. It was just some random place somewhere there in the temple. But then it says Samuel, when Samuel lies down to go to sleep, Samuel lies down in the house of the Lord next to the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the reason it tells you that is because this was a very specific place in the temple. At this time in Jewish history, in the temple, there was a room. It was called the Holy of Holies. It was the most sacred spot at the inner court of the temple. And inside of it was where the Ark of the Covenant was. And that's where, at this point in Jewish history, that's where they believed God's presence dwelt. They literally believed that's where God was in this specific place in the temple. Now, we know now, we have Jesus. We live in the era of the New Testament, where we believe that, when Jesus died on the cross, the temple curtain was ripped. So God's presence doesn't just dwell in this one room, the Holy of Holies. God's presence, His Spirit, dwells in us, right? That's what we know, that's what we believe today. But if you go back at this point in Jewish history, that's what they believed. This is where God's presence was. So what it's saying is Samuel was lying down right next to the Holy of Holies, right next to the Ark of the Covenant. He's close to where God is. And it's kind of pointing this out. The older generation is sleeping in this random place. The younger generation is sleeping next to where the voice of God is, where they can hear it clearly. So it goes on from there, verse 4. "Then the Lord called Samuel. Samuel answered, 'Here I am.' And he ran to Eli and said, 'Here I am, you called me.' But Eli said, 'I did not call, go back and lie down.' So he went and lied down." So Samuel hears the voice of God, but he doesn't know what it is. So he goes and he thinks Eli is calling him. So just like kids do, right? He goes into their parents' bedroom. He goes into his dad's bedroom late at night, and he's like, Dad, you called me? And because he doesn't understand what's happening. Again, the Lord called Samuel. And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, you called me. My son, Eli said, I did not call. Go back and lie down. He's a little more annoyed this time, right? Like, here's some NyQuil. Go back and lie down. Now, Samuel did not yet know the Lord. This is a key part to understand. Samuel does not yet know the Lord. He didn't recognize God's voice. He didn't know what was happening to him. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. So a third time the Lord called Samuel, and Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, you called me. Then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, Go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. Here's why I love this story. I think there's two things that are happening in this story. When you think about like the generations in the church, oftentimes it's our kids, right? It's the younger generation that sort of wake us up again to spiritual things. You see this all the time. Not because of hard-heartedness, not because but just because of familiarity, routine. Oftentimes, the things that at one time were sacred, were awe-inspired, they inspired awe. And they were sacred and they were holy to us. We've gone to church all our lives. We've prayed the same prayers all our lives. We know what the pastor's going to preach on before he says it. And so, we kind of experience some spiritual presbycusis. We lose some of the ability to hear what God's saying. And I can't tell you how many families here at Frontline have said this. I'm not, and they would say it if you asked them today. They would say, it was my kids who actually got our family back in church. I've heard that so many times. I mean, maybe like I grew up in the church, or one time knew God, but then what happened is I walked away from the church, I walked away, or there were other things that just became more important. But then I got to the stage of my life, right, where I had kids. And suddenly I had children. And then I realized something was missing, and I wanted them to experience. So oftentimes it's our kids' ministry that will bring people back to church, bring families back to church. It's because our kids oftentimes are the ones who wake us up again in our lives to spiritual things. But the other thing I love about this passage of Scripture is that Samuel, when he hears the voice of God, he doesn't know what to do with that. He doesn't recognize it. And he needs Eli's coaching. He needs the coaching of the older generation. And Eli says, okay, when you hear the voice, here's what you do. You say, Speak, for your servant is listening. And I love the fact that Samuel borrows Eli's language, and he uses his exact language. Speak, for your servant is listening, when he talks to God. The younger generation that's growing up needs mentors so desperately. They need the older generation to model and to give an example of what it means to walk with God, what it means to hear God's voice. It needs to lend some language, some learning to the younger generation as they grow up in the church. And so you see, like, Samuel didn't just know what to do when he heard God's voice. He needed that coaching of that relationship, that mentoring relationship of that older voice. And so you see both of those things happening. And so here's what I'd love to do today if we could. The content's really simple. If you take notes, some notes are on the back of your bulletin. But I just want to ask the question, how do we look up together? How do we do that? How do we seek God in terms of all the generations in the church together? And what I'd love to do, if I could, I want to talk to the older generation first. And I want to give you a word, and I want to kind of explain maybe what your role is. And then if I could, I want to talk to the younger generation. I consider myself part of the older generation now. I'm 39 years old. And so I would consider myself that. So if you're late 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, we'll call you the older generation. If you're teens, 20s, early 30s, we'll call you the younger generation. So I want to talk to the older generation for a moment and then the younger generation, okay? So first, the older generation. If I could give you a word, the word I would give you is the word commission. Your role, your job in the church is to be a voice of commissioning for the younger generation. One of the things I love about being a dad is watching my kids experience something for the first time that I experienced years and years ago. You know what I'm talking about? I love when they experience something that I've already experienced, and it makes it alive for me again. Like sledding. I remember when my boys were younger, I took them sledding for the first time. And I hadn't been sledding in years. Sledding was boring, right? I'd done it. There was other things that were exciting. And I'll always remember how taking them sledding and getting them to experience that for the first time, it's like it became fun again all over. And it was just a blast watching them learn how to experience this for themselves. And I think a lot of times that's what happens is if the older generation can see that, we get to experience the things of God again in a fresh way if we're willing to be a voice of commissioning for the younger generation. A lot of times, unfortunately, in the church, the older generation doesn't, necessarily view that as their role. Maybe they're just not given permission or called to it. And oftentimes, I think we miss out. The younger generation misses out, but the older generation also misses out. It's in a calling and a purpose that they have in the church. I love that my son, Alan, was up here playing guitar with us a moment ago. The other guitar player who was standing back here in the back is my oldest son, Alan. He's 14. And I've shared this before here at Frontline, but why this is so significant for me to have him up here playing guitar and being a part of the worship with us at church is when Alan was first born, Alan was born with the deformity of his left hand. Okay, so he literally only has a couple of functioning fingers on his left hand. And so when he was born, the doctor who delivered him, literally, I think trying to prepare us or trying to soften the blow a little bit, literally said to us, there are some things he's not going to be able to do. Never forget him talking to Carrie and I. There's some things your son is not going to be able to do. And specifically, I remember him saying he won't be able to play certain sports. And then the one that really stands out in my memory is he actually said he will not ever probably be able to play a musical instrument. And so that was the news we got. And several months later, we were talking to a hand surgeon. It was a specialist because he had to get some surgery on that hand. And I remember that this hand surgeon saying this to me, and it really impacted me. He said, listen, your job as a dad, because I was all concerned, well, will he be able to do this? Will he be able to do that? And I remember the doctor said, listen, your job as a dad is just not to tell him that he can't do something. That's your job. Your job as a father is just to let him try. Just don't be a voice telling him you can't do this, you can't do that. Because here's what happens to us a lot of times as parents, right? We'll look at our kids and we'll tell them they can't do something, but it's because we're trying to protect them, right? We look at them and we think, well, I don't want to set them up for failure. I don't want them to get disappointed or whatever. So we tell them we can't do that. And a lot of times, we think it's for their own good. And this doctor just said, hey, just don't be that voice in his life that says you can't do this, you can't do this. If he doesn't know any better, he'll find his own way to do it. If you don't just tell him he can't do it, you never know. He might discover just his own way. And so when Alan turned 12 years old, he said to me, Dad, I want you to buy me a guitar. I want to learn how to play the guitar. And I said, okay, sounds good. Let's go get you a lefty guitar. So Alan's right-handed. He's a right-handed person. But we got him a left-handed guitar and strung it up left-handed, and he has taught himself how to play the guitar left-handed, even though he's right-handed. And he's up here worshiping God and worshiping. Isn't that amazing? It's amazing what people can do the younger generation can do if you just don't tell them they can't. Now here's the thing. It might look different for them than it did for you in your generation. Are we preaching that in the church? The way they hear God's voice and the way they respond, it might look different, it might be a little bit different than the way it was for our generation. But that doesn't mean they're not hearing the voice of God and figuring out what God is saying to them in their time, in their day. And our role is not to be a voice that says, you can't, that's not the way we did it, that's not the way it worked for us. Your role is to say, I'm going to commission you, and I'm going to mentor you, and I'm going to be a voice in your life that helps you know how to respond to the voice of God in your own unique way. There's a guy who went to Frontline for a number of years, and he was a fly fishing guy. So he left what I would consider to be a pretty successful career to move up to Baldwin, Michigan, and he became a fly fishing guide. He takes these people out on the river and teaches them how to fly fish for a living. And so I've gone fishing with him a number of times. And I remember asking him at one point, I said, why did you become a fly fishing guide? You know, like, why did you leave your career and actually, like, you could have just kept fishing, right? And kept your career. Why did you leave a career and actually become a fly fishing guide? And here's what he said to me. I loved his answer. He said, it's because at a certain point, it actually becomes more fun to watch someone else catch a fish. It actually, at a certain point, you've caught so many fish, you've caught a bazillion fish, you know exactly how to do it. At a certain point, actually, fishing actually becomes more fun if you're helping someone else catch a fish. I think that's such a truth of life. A lot of times, even like when you look at the church, the things of God, like they become alive to us again. We engage with them in a new way when we get to a point in our lives where it becomes about helping the younger generation catch a fish and learn how to fish. Helping the younger generation learn how to hear the voice of God for them and go after it. So we can be a voice of commissioning. We can be a voice that helps the younger generation step up and see what God's calling them to do. Okay, so that's the word commission. And then for the younger generation, if I could switch gears, so if you're teens, 20s, early 30s, if I were to give you a word, what's your role in the church? I would say your role is to ask. Your role is to ask. Again, in the story, I love that Samuel, when he hears the voice of God, he doesn't know what it is, so he goes to Eli, who is his spiritual father, his spiritual mentor, and he asks him. And then I love that he uses Eli's exact language. He actually borrows his language to actually know how to respond to God. Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. And sometimes in the church, I feel like younger people feel like maybe they can't ask, or they don't have a place, or maybe they don't need to ask. But if I were to give you a word, it's to actually be a person who intentionally asks the older generation to mentor you and ask them to help you grow. Because there's things they've navigated already that they can help you with. They've learned a few things, whether it be about marriage. If you know a godly man or godly woman, a godly couple, they know some things about marriage. They've learned through the valleys they've walked through. They know some things about hearing God's voice, to know what your calling, your purpose is in life. How do I know what God's will is for my life? How do I know what I'm supposed to do? They've navigated that, and they've walked through it. And if you ask, there's great learning, there's great teaching that they can give you. I'll never forget when my boys were very young. I remember we went one day for a walk. We were headed to the park that's near my house, and as we walked by, there was this tree, and underneath this tree was this large, dead, bloated raccoon. The thing was just bloated, it was dead, it looked gross. And of course, my boys immediately, they're like, "Oh, this is awesome!" So they gather around it. And the questions, oh my goodness, the questions. They started asking all these, well, why did he die? Well, is he going to wake up again? Just question after question. What was his name? That was one of the questions. Does his family know? Should we find his family and tell them that he's dead? Well, so many questions. And I remember I'm sitting there, I'm trying to get to the park, so they're asking these questions, and I had this kind of light bulb moment for some reason as they're sitting there asking all these questions about this dead raccoon. At some point, trying to answer the questions, this thought hit me. I realized, oh, wait a minute, they're not just wrestling with this dead raccoon's mortality, right? The reason they're asking all these questions is they're wrestling with their own mortality. They're wrestling with this truth about life, that a part of life is death. They're trying to figure that out. They're trying to wrestle with that. They're thinking about it for the world they live in, for their own lives. And so in that moment, I remember, for some reason, it dawned on me that's what was happening. So it changed the way I answered those questions when I realized those were the questions they were asking, that's what they were trying to get at. And I began to answer those questions differently. But a lot of times I think we have things we can impart to the younger generation if the younger generation is willing to ask the questions. So if you're in the younger generation today, here's what I would say to you. Don't settle for any voice lesser than the voice of God in your life. Okay? You can be radical for Jesus right now. You don't have to wait till you're 40. You can do that now. Don't settle for any lesser voice. Don't settle for anger instead of passion. Don't settle for lust when you could have love, real romantic love. Don't settle for popularity when you could have significance, a life of significance with the things of God. Don't settle for just whatever would make you popular in the moment. Don't settle for anything less than the voice of God. And there's a generation of people who have walked that and who can impart that to you. But you have to be willing to ask. When I was just starting out as a pastor, I wanted to be mentored by older pastors. I'd grown up for whatever reason, I've had some great mentors over my life. A man named Ernest who helped me learn how to play sports and lift weights when I was younger. Musical people. My dad was a great mentor to me. So when I became a pastor, I was like, I want to be mentored by some older pastors who really know how to do this well. And so here's what I did. I went around in this area to several mentors, several guys who were older guys in ministry who I just thought were doing a great job. And I literally went to them and I asked them to mentor me. I said, would you please come and mentor me? And one by one, every single one of them said no. No, I don't have time. I don't have time for that. And they didn't. They didn't have time to mentor me and take a bunch of time to do that. They were very busy. And so here's what I did. At some point, I got tired of being told no, so I figured something. I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. So I called each one of them back up and I said, here's the deal. I will buy you lunch. We'll have one lunch together. I will buy you lunch, and I will come with 10 questions. They're questions I'll come with. I'll come up with the questions. These are going to be 10 questions of stuff I'm dealing with. And all you have to do is sit there during lunch and just answer the questions. And one by one, every single one of those